Chapter 31. The night took a heavy toll from Ken, but for Flicka there was a resurgence. At the moment when Ken drew her into his arms and cried her name, the spring of the down-whirling spiral was broken. Flicka was released, and not once again did she feel it. The life currents in her body turned, and in weak and wavering fashion flowed upward. A power went into her from Ken, all of his youth and strength and magnetism given her freely and abundantly on the stream of his love, from his ardent eyes to hers. But for Ken, there was, first, the creeping numbness of those parts where the head and neck of the filly pressed. Then the deep chill from the cold water running over his legs, his thighs, almost up to his waist. The mountain stream was fed from the snowy range in the northwest, and the water was far colder than the shallow, sun-dappled surface looked. Ken's legs were shriveled and cramped with the cold, and long before the night was over, his teeth were chattering and his body shaking with chills. It didn't matter. Nothing mattered but that he should hold Flicka and hold the life in her. At dawn, when there should have been light, there was first a gray gloom and then persistent twilight. The wind had failed and the clouds had their way at last, forced up from all points of the compass by pressure in the lower areas behind them, Laramie and Cheyenne, both 1,000 feet down, and the valleys behind the mountains that were to the north and south. Often McLaughlin studied the sky, especially the rims of Sherman Hill, and said, "It's trying its best to storm, but the clouds can't get over the mountains." Now they had got over. There wasn't room for them all. They obscured the zenith and then doubled up, one layer below the other. But Ken knew nothing of the weather, only Flicka, the heat of her body that burned his arms. Toward morning he knew that the heat had gone, and it was not death. When he spoke to her, her eyes still looked back into his. He was full of thankfulness. As the long vigil neared its end, his senses swam away into a state that was half sleep, half unconsciousness. Often the world swayed. His head sank forward. He heard a commotion, loud bellowing of the cows, snarling cries. Some small young animal screamed in terror, and Ken lifted heavy lids to see, across on the hill, under the 3 pines where he had first brought Flicka her oats, a little white and yellow Guernsey heifer, one of the yearlings that shared the calf pasture at night with the milch cows, in the grip of a tawny beast. Ken watched without fear or emotion. The milch cows watched too, gathered in a clump, not too near, now and then bellowing. Several of them pawed and stamped the ground and tossed their heads, turning them as if looking for help. Where was the bull who should have been their protector? Alone, they did not dare attack. They were all dehorned. Though they could lower their heads and make the gesture of goring, they were without weapons. The lion had missed its first hold, and the heifer, rolling and twisting on the ground by some freak of chance, escaped and ran away with a terrible bleating of fear. The lion pursued, low on the ground, like Polly stalking a bird. It leaped again, executing an extraordinary parabola in the air, and this time Ken saw the neat trick which Ross had described. As the cat curved over the heifer and then fell on its neck, the calf's head was suddenly twisted right around. The mouth pointed upward. Its scream was cut short, and it went down. There was no more struggling. It was instantly killed. The cat seized the carcass by the shoulder and dragged it a little way, then, excited by the taste of blood, stretched himself out on the ground, holding the dead heifer between his front paws. At first he tore the abdomen, then one of the plump haunches, the throat. Ken saw it all as if in a dream. It had nothing to do with him. And long before the grisly meal was finished, his eyes were closed again, and he was floating somewhere, the pain and numbness gone, and a delicious warmth stealing all through him.